In the Arctic, scientists from all over the world are breeding a virus that could dramatically change humans. But why? At the secret Arctic Biosystem Station, an infection occurs, killing 2 scientists and causing a third to suffer unprecedented symptoms. The station chief, Dr. Hatake, asks for help from the US Center for Disease Control. Dr. Alan Farragut is against the trip, but his ex-wife Julia, who is also to fly to the Arctic, informs him that the third patient is his brother Peter, and the scientist agrees. Along with the group goes a representative of the military, Major Sergio. During the flight, Dr. Allen assigns the responsibilities. Sarah will have to determine the degree of contamination, Julia will try to find the cause, Doreen must check the lab animals, Major Sergio will analyze the life support systems of the station. The helicopter arrives at the station, where the scientists learn that the number of sick people has not changed. Apparently, the virus is not airborne. After noticing that the helicopter leaves, they get the explanation that one helicopter is based nearby and can always be summoned. There are a total of 106 scientists from 36 countries working at the base, but Alan wants to see his brother first and foremost. The man's appearance is terrible and his vital signs are critical. Julia begins taking tests, while the head of the security tells Sarah that he is Dr. Hatake's adopted son and would do anything for him. At this point, Julia shows Alan the blood. It's black. And then Peter scatters those around him, but after receiving a sedative shot, he falls asleep. Meanwhile, Doreen and Major look around the lab. The guard accompanying them assures them that the experiments were performed only on rats, which surprises Doreen. What about the monkeys? At this time, their colleagues are examining the dead, and after opening a bag, Sarah becomes sick. The bodies are completely decomposed, and black liquid is leaking from the bags. The scientists don't understand why Peter is still alive. While examining the rats, Doreen suddenly removes her protective suit. She is now certain that the virus is not airborne. At this time, Major finds hair in the sink drain, which Doreen immediately identifies as monkey hair. So why are they being lied to? Meanwhile, Julia goes to Hatake, and he assures her that Peter's area of work is mutagens and mutations, not viruses at all. At the same time, Alan inspects his brother's quarters and finds a video diary. When Sarah enters, he points to Peter's gesture. It was their code sign, which means run away from here immediately. The alarm goes off. The scientists rush to the isolation ward and find that Peter has disappeared and that there is a hole in the ceiling. But he was dead this morning, wasn't he? The guards go in search for the fugitive. Doreen and Major find a locked compartment, which Sergio opens with liquid nitrogen. Inside, they find hundreds of monkey cages, with the doors broken from the inside. Suddenly, a small macaque rushes at Doreen, but Major knocks it out. The animal's appearance is very unusual. Meanwhile, the body of one of the guards is found in the pipe. Alan asks that all the inhabitants of the base be locked in their rooms. In the meantime, Major sets up a custom antenna and contacts someone on the mainland, after which he sees a huge number of frozen monkeys around. When he returns, he tells Hatake that their employers are unhappy with the doctor. And the scientists realize that the virus does not kill the infected, but turns them into something, while Peter, with the help of the guard's severed arm, gains access to the solarium. From there, screams are heard, and blood is splattered on the glass. When Peter attacked, the scientists tell them that he pressed his mouth against them, as if he wanted to pass something on. But the 3 manage to escape and run away, and now they have to be tracked down. The guards bring the files of the missing men, whom no one has seen anywhere since the escape. Ellen offers to go through all the rooms. Meanwhile, Doreen dissects the monkey and feels movement behind her, but sees no one. And Julia clearly hears sounds under the ceiling, from where Peter is watching her. Caught in isolation, the scientists of the station resent their confinement. Ellen's group enters the room of the first missing person, while she comes to Doreen. The woman behaves nervously and asks to be taken to the helicopter. Julia at this time is watching video footage from the lab and sees racks of rats falling over on their own. Meanwhile, the guards grab the second fugitive, which does not please the inhabitants of the station. They demand the truth, and Alan explains the danger of the virus spreading around the world. One thing he's willing to guarantee is that they will stay with them until the problem is solved. At the same time, Sarah goes to get the cure and is attacked by Peter, but the girl manages to close the doors and he leaves without touching her. Julia again inspects Peter's laboratory. She intends to repeat the scientist's latest experiments. Meanwhile, an infected woman attacks Doreen, but she manages to escape. Alan realizes that Peter was trying to obtain painkillers for himself, which means that there is still something human in him. Major follows Peter's trail and encounters him in a pipe. Later, the unconscious man is dragged outside, and there are no visible signs of infection on him. Julia repeats the experiment and witnesses the aggressive behavior of the vaccinated rats. And Sarah is attacked by the isolated scientists who demand to be let outside. Alan removes his protective suit, proving his solidarity with the scientists. Later, Julia suggests a theory that the virus is rebuilding the brain to create the perfect attack machine. Meanwhile, Major catches one of the scientists preparing to escape. The man is ready to go hundreds of kilometers away on a snowmobile because there's something terrible going on at the station. Unable to convince the man to return to the base, he kills him and hides his body in the snow. And in the isolation room, the scientists trick Sarah and break out. Alan voices his displeasure to Hatake and demands that he finally tell the truth. After he leaves, the doctor pulls out an album filled with pictures of Julia. He then removes his lenses, after which his eyes begin to glow. At this time, Julia is taking a shower and suddenly sees Peter, who reaches for her lips. The woman tries to break free, but fails. Alan finds Julia and brings her back to her senses, but she hides what has happened to her. After walking her to her room, Alan runs into Peter, who asks his brother for help. 32 hours have passed and there is still no solution. And then Hatake sees Peter on a gurney and expresses his fears about a repeat of the escape incident. Alan reminds him the brother has surrendered himself. It is unlikely that he will run anywhere. Nevertheless, Hatake insists on transferring Peter to a more secure place, level P. Alan approves of turning this level into an isolation ward, while Julia tries to figure out what Peter was doing to her. Suddenly, she sees in the mirror a change in his skin. However, it turns out that these are just visions. While the people are discussing setting up the isolation ward, one of the infected comes out to them and asks for help. But the guard shoots the woman. Alan instantly rushes to her aid and pulls the bullet out right in the hallway, thus saving her life. He is outraged by the guard's action, but Hatake takes him under his protection. In the meantime, Julia notices that Peter's lips are moving and tries to make out his words, but Alan's arrival distracts her. He convenes a meeting of his team where he instructs them to prove the transmission of the virus from the monkey, which will help create a vaccine. Later, Julia notices Sarah's hands shaking, but she explains that this is just fatigue. And Doreen and Major discover the monkey is missing. The angry woman tries to go to Hatake, but Major promises to get another monkey. Julia draws blood from Peter and expresses her pain at what has happened to them. Meanwhile, Major shows Doreen the graveyard of the frozen monkeys, and the woman notices the consternation on their faces. She tries to find out from the man who he really is while he takes body samples. Sarah shows Julia an enzyme she has isolated that can identify the infected. Julia offers to test it on her, but Sarah doesn't want to waste her time and goes to report the achievement to Alan. Julia then performs the test herself and finds nothing dangerous in her. Meanwhile, another escapee is found on the floor of the isolation ward. He refuses to go to quarantine and demands to be given the drug created by his colleagues, Sodra, but the scientist's colleagues refute his findings. Doreen is examining a fragment of another monkey's body, and suddenly the virus cells begin to proliferate rapidly. The scientist manages to freeze the dangerous organism, and Major asks not to inform anyone. Alan demands that Hatake provide data on the drug found at the station, and the latter, after threatening to inform the whole world about what is happening, informs that the researchers have created a drug, Sodru, which destroys any virus with 100% probability. But almost all of the test animals died. The scientists begin to test the inhabitants of the station and find that 43 people are infected. They are left in quarantine, but on the way out of the isolation ward, a recently wounded woman rushes onto the guards. Possessing unprecedented strength, she scatters the men and runs away. They try to catch the fugitive. Julia begins to suspect Sarah of being infected, and she tests herself. Seeing the negative result, Julia apologizes, just as the guards report the attack and the death of one of them at the hands of the escaped woman. Panic ensues among the isolated. Just then, the dangerous woman attacks another guard, and as she sees her face close to the victim, Julia recalls Peter's attack on her. The guard, under pressure from the frightened men, drops the gun, while the woman notices Julia and rushes towards her. She is stopped by a shot from Alan, who picks up the gun. He asks Julia to go upstairs, but she shows him her wounded palm with black blood. Alan informs Hatake of his intention to ask for help from the military when the satellite comes on. At this time, Julia returns to the isolation room and suddenly remembers her negative test and realizes that it is not working. She is about to report it, but suddenly there is an explosion and internal communication is lost. The people trapped on the lower level decide to stop the air purification system located on the same floor in order to gain their freedom. Julia argues against this decision and is simply ushered out the door, where she suddenly sees a man in a gas mask who beckons her after him. But as she turns the corner, the woman finds no one. At this time, Alan tries to find out what happened to the communication system, but Hatake can't say anything definite. The satellite dish was damaged in the explosion, and who did it is unknown. And he has no intention of letting the trapped ones out so as not to risk the others. Meanwhile, a woman, a doctor from the station, knocks on Sarah's door. She was tested for the infection yesterday, but today she's feeling strange. Sarah assures her that the tests are reliable, for she has done them herself, but the doctor shows a rash on the arm. Alan is sharing with his remaining team Hatake's intentions to leave the infected downstairs when Sarah arrives. Doreen can't yet say for sure who infected whom, the monkey the man or the man the monkey. The scientist goes to check on his brother, sees how he's suffering and asks the local physician to give Peter the cure, called Sodra. He speaks out against it, he has not tested it on a man, but Ellen insists and the doctor agrees. Hatake expresses his indignation to Major Sergio. Why did he blow up the dish? But Major is willing to do anything to hide what is happening on the station from the world. At that moment, the alarm goes off, the air filters are disabled. Hatake announces his desire to go down with only one guard. Sarah, however, takes tests from the doctor and they again show a negative result, but the woman no longer believes it. Meanwhile, Peter is injected with Sodra, while Doreen again interrogates Major about his activities. The man admits that he's an agent from the Pentagon's Special Branch and is here conducting an internal investigation into forbidden research. And it looks like something like a genetic weapon has been created here. Doreen calms down and agrees to continue doing covert research. Downstairs, Julia is attacked by one of the infected. She rushes to escape and is rescued by an unknown man, dragging her inside the isolated room. They barely manage to close the doors, after which Julia asks her rescuer to remove the gas mask because the virus is not airborne. It turns out that Julia's rescuer is a woman named Jay, and she is one of the scientists working at the station. Meanwhile, Peter's condition stabilizes, but the man never regains consciousness. Alan talks to him, recalling their terrible childhood, when the boys had to defend themselves from their abusive father, who was also alcoholic. He also tells him that Peter has always been the man he could rely on. Sarah shares some pain pills with the doctor, and she suddenly starts hallucinating. Sarah is about to go to Alan, but the woman reminds her of her tumor. She's an oncologist and has noticed signs of the disease in Sarah. She will remain silent about it unless Sarah sends her downstairs. At that time, Doreen gets staggering results. The virus is unequivocally man-made. But what was it created for? Peter suddenly comes to his senses, and Sarah admits to Alan that the tests don't work. The infected have not yet been identified, but there is now doubt that everyone on the lower level is sick. In the meantime, Hatake and his bodyguard make their way down the secret staircase. Alan tries to get his brother to tell him about his work, but he assures him that he was doing nothing. And soon it turns out that the virus is back. The cure, Sodra, has failed. Alan again tries to get answers to his questions, but he suddenly says that Hatake was interested in Julia. Peter confesses that they were seeing his wife all the time, which is why he went to the Arctic. He then apologizes and dies. Alan tries to resuscitate his brother, while Sarah goes to see Hatake, but is twisted by a seizure. The girl goes down to the storeroom and takes morphine. The doctors manage to restart Peter's heart, but his brain activity is at zero. Sarah injects her patient, and seeing that she has calmed down, injects the medicine into herself. Downstairs, Julia and Jay find a grocery store. Suddenly, they notice initials and drawings on the wall. Stunned, Julia confesses this is her handwriting and her way of drawing. Has she been here before? Hatake and the guard find a group of isolated men near the purification machinery and convince them to drop their weapons. After waiting for the machinery to turn on, Hatake suddenly draws his gun and kills all three. Then he leaves, instructing the guard to get rid of the bodies. At this point, Doreen tells Major that according to her research, the virus DNA has been spliced with human DNA, and it's a completely unknown chain. The people who developed the virus want to change humans from the inside out. She is about to show this to Ellen, but Major suddenly injects her with an unknown drug. She loses consciousness. Hatake meets an infected man in the corridor, but the man suddenly retreats from Hatake, as if frightened by him. Meanwhile, Major drops racks of rats on Doreen and then leaves. And this is where episode 4 ends. The idea of changing the human genetic code is quite relevant today, and scientists are actually working on the issue of changing the genetic code to cure lethal diseases. But what can it lead to? Friends, this story will continue the day after tomorrow on the channel.